Okay, let's talk about refining crude oil.
Sure.
Everybody's talking about refining crude oil.
I ain't going to do it.
Yeah, you just sit there and hush. All right, you got it. Cool. Why are detergents mixed in gasoline? To prevent deposits. What kind of deposits you talking about?
Build up on carburetor.
You know, back in the 80s when they first started doing fuel injection, somebody got concerned that varnish deposits and stuff would build up in fuel injectors, and so they started putting some in there called olefins. And they were like little black particles of, thing that, I don't know what it was, but it was a little stuff that was supposed to mix with octane really well, and it was supposed to go brushing through those injectors and keeping them clean. Only problem is these little black particles, tiny little black particles, they would get trapped in between the injector panel and the place where it's sealed when you shut the car off, and then they would get baked on there, and they would start causing the problems they were actually supposed to prevent. They would also pile up on the intake valve. And because they soaked up octane so well, they wound up when we'd start it up, it would squirt that gas on there, and the octane would get soaked up by those stupid olefin deposits, and you'd wind up with the things falling on their face and wouldn't run right and all that kind of thing. Jeeps had a terrible time with it. Ford Rangers did, and a bunch of other vehicles did too. And they gave us this thing that we could go in through we could actually pull the injectors out, look in there with a borescope, see the deposits, and then we could take a little vacuum attachment, put on the intake manifold, and we'd use walnut holes that would blast through there under air pressure, and we would clean those back of those intake valves, and boy, you can't believe how much better one would run and all that. But anyway, that was the kind of detergents they were really doing. The other problem that we had with our early gasoline, that when we first started putting the high pressure fuel pumps in there, and this was something I just kind of figured out, a lot of those high pressure fuel pumps would wear out because there wasn't enough lubricant in the gasoline to grease that fuel pump. And now you might even notice that nowadays, I don't know, Willie, you're older than me, you probably remember a lot of time when you put gas on you and it dries out real fast. Well, it ain't like that anymore. It's kind of greasy. You know what I'm saying? So they got some lubricant in there, I think, for the fuel pumps to keep them from wearing out so quick. I mean, so the fuel makers work together with the car people, to make things better. How much gasoline can be made from a barrel of crude oil? About 20 gallons of gas can be made from that. So according to the handout, actually the gasoline is the waste. Everything else, According to the handout, the oil drilling rig can drill an oil well up to how deep? 22,000 feet. That's a long way. How many miles is that? 26,000. How many miles is that? That's about 5 miles, isn't it? That's, well, how far is it from here through to the other side of the earth?
How would you say, 93 million miles?
No, that's to the sun. Yeah. How far is it? What's the diameter of the planet? You got any idea? 8,000 miles. 8,000. Y'all should know this. How come y'all know this? You don't know this school?
8,000 miles.
8,000 mials. 8,000 miles from here through to China. It's 8,000 miles through the center of the planet. 25,000 miles around. Don't you know what pi is? All right. Okay. All right then. What is straight run gasoline?
Raw gas or fraction.
Yeah. So that's raw gas. So why does gasoline not need prolonged exposure to air? And it becomes oxidized. How many of you guys have you noticed that whenever and diesel fuel's got a problem with that too? If you might notice that when diesel fuel oxidizes, it turns into something that looks like tar. All right. So in your diesel fuel tank, you're actually pulling fuel out of there, from the bottom of the tank, but you've actually got a return line coming back on a lot of these diesels. And there was a time when they just have that return line just kind of spraying out and just letting it dribble into the fuel. Well, the only problem with that is it would get oxidized because it was coming out where there was some oxygen in the tank too, and it would turn into tar, and then that tar would settle to the bottom and clog up that dadgum screen. How you going to prevent that from happening? They come up with a way. Huh?
Drop the tube down?
That's a good idea. We run it down here and we let it blow out underneath even when it's all the way low on fuel, we let it blow out under there. See? A lot of folks don't even think about that kind of stuff, but this is the kind of stuff you got to do in order to make one keep working right. Okay, according to the handout, crude oil is also known as what?
Texas tea.
Petroleum. Yeah, Texas tea. Yeah, that's what Jed Clampett called it. All right. Yeah. Technician A says heavier fractions of crude oil have lower boiling and condensing points, so they fraction out at the top of the fractioning tower. And technician B says catalytic cracking is a process by which parts of the car's exhaust can be damaged.
Either.
Okay, that's going to be 7. That's going to be an either. Now the catalytic cracking tower, and I've worked down in that part of the country where those things are. You'll see these big old. You ever see these big old dome-shaped things in them oil refineries? That's a catalytic cracking unit, and it's got all these little tanks like that all around, you know, both sides. And they put this under pressure. They put that oil in there under pressure, and they put it up to 1,200 degrees under pressure. And what happens is the lighter elements are up here. You wind up with your ether and all of this. The farther to the top you go, the lighter it is. And you go to the bottom, it turns into tar and grease and all that kind of junk, you know. But right up in the middle, up there, of course, gasoline and diesel fuel. The gasoline slightly above diesel fuel in there, and all that. All right. So then we're gonna have, let's see, technician. Wait a minute. Impurities in crude oil include what? That's question number 8. That's number 8. That's all of the above. We got salt water, we got sulfur, we got nitrogen, we got metals and oxygen. Why is fractional distillation possible?
Because of the different boiling condensation point 0.55 combo.
Yeah, there you go. You guys learned something from this handout? You learned some things? You know stuff now that you didn't know before? Why is crude oil called crude?
And it's raw form.
It's rude, crude, and sociably unacceptable. Okay, number 10 is actually B, because of its raw form. All right, that's refining crude. All right. Now then, okay, we're gonna go. I'm gonna talk you guys through. We're gonna talk a little bit more about oil. This is that next number. We're gonna do the next handout. Is the one on the engine oil. Got me? Engine oil is the next one. We got a test, and we're gonna talk you through it. Okay, you see these motor oil commercials, they're going to tell you their brands offer the best protection for your engine. The fact is, all motor oil brands are approved, must meet some same minimum performance standards, and people that make the engine set the standards. So while it's easy to buy a good brand of motor oil, there's important differences in the types or grades of oil that make it easy to buy the wrong one. And be really careful with that. So no matter what brand there is that you use, there's a lot of decisions to make with selecting oil for a given engine. Deciding incorrectly can be costly. Mercedes-Benz owners across the United States found out a while back when their regular motor oil was used in an engine that was supposed to be filled with synthetic oil. Choosing between petroleum and synthetic oil is only one of several decisions. Now that Chrysler Crossfire we had in here, that little yellow one that belongs to Marianne, that thing calls for 9 quarts of synthetic oil. And it's a 10,000 mile oil change intervals. If you look under the hood of that car, and it calls for synthetic oil, particularly if it's something like a Mercedes or one of these exotic cars, you better put that in there. You know what I mean? The newer the car, the more critical it is that you put exactly the right oil they call for it in there. Particularly on hybrids. If you don't put the right kind of oil in there, the customer will come back and says, I was getting 96 miles to the gallon, and now since you changed the oil, I'm only getting 78, and I want that straightened out. You know, this kind of garbage goes on. Wrong air pressure in the tires, all kind of other stuff. But anyway, long report. But in addition to viscosity specifications, what's viscosity? Yeah, pretty close. Let's look here. You're going to need to select the right American Petroleum Institute service category, API service category. Most service manuals specify motor oil with API starburst symbol, and that certifies oil meets all the needs of a light-duty automotive gasoline engine. But they're recently called for motor oil that conforms to a specific category too. So, a service category certifies the oil's ability to pass specific lab tests that measure the oil's ability to perform in an engine. Oil's tested the way it pours when it's hot or cold, its ability to resist wear, foaming, oxidation, deposit formation at various temperatures, and a bunch of other physical and chemical qualities. It's tested when new, and it's tested again after they run it in an engine. So a lot of the certification tests are bench tests. When I was in Savannah, we used to go to the flea market over. Me and the boys did years ago. Richmond Hill is a big old flea market over there. And anybody ever been to Fort Stewart? Anybody military guys? Now you remember I don't know if you ever been to Keller's Flea Market over there. That's a cool place. But I went there one day and they had this little Iron Duke engine, a little 4-cylinder, up on a trailer. I'm gonna go over these answers with you guys, so you're not gonna crash and burn. You can listen while I go. But anyway, so don't be afraid. Anyway, they had this engine. And I saw them do this. They started it up, and it was running. It had a radiator on it and all this kind of stuff. Just sat on a little stand on its trailer. Okay. They took the oil drain plug out while the engine was running, drained engine oil out of it. They took the oil pan off. while the engine's running. They took the valve cover off. They took the side cover off while the engine was running. And it's sitting here running the whole time. You can see the crankshaft whirling down there, and you can see the rocker arms and the, you know, the lifters and all working. And it ran all day with no oil. Wasn't pulling the load or anything. But they had some kind of Teflon additive in there. It coated everything with Teflon, and it would run without oil in it. You know, I mean, it's pretty interesting. You know, they did that. I watched this happen, and knowing what I know, I was thinking, this is pretty impressive demonstration, no matter who you are. You know, just watch that motor run without no oil. Because usually, if you got one, particularly if you're pulling, you know, it's going to weld itself together. Okay, so many of the certification tests are bench tests, and for these, the engine is only used to age the oil. So that oil can pass all the tests and will perform predictably in a real-world engine. They don't want to just make the oil and say, this BI8 without testing it on an engine, right? API licenses 2 different certification labels to all marketers. The one's brand names we all know. The specs for one of those labels are generated by the International Lubricant Standardization and Approval Committee, ILSAC. Can you remember that? International Lubricant Standardization and Approval Committee. And all right, Jeremy, you ain't in a beer joint. Pick your head up. All right. So that consists of the big 3 domestic car manufacturers and Japanese car manufacturers, and it defines the performance characteristics and the chemistry of the oil it's going to accept for its use in engines. API makes sure the oil sold by marketers displaying that label meets the definition, so you got to watchdogging each other. Some oils meet both the API service category and the ILSAC specs, and they'll carry both labels. So there's another group of service ratings generated by European car makers under the ACEA, which translates from French to English as the European Automobile Manufacturers Association. And so many ACA specifications are based on the same automotive standards, but American Society for Testing and Materials. That's ASTM. Remember the acronyms. There will be a pop test on this tomorrow morning. Okay, used by the API. So far, the ACEA service ratings rarely appear on oil containers sold in the United States. You don't see that hardly ever on any oil container. ACEA, you know, you see API and all that, SAE. While a lot of things are changing, service categories based on ILSAC specs are considered close enough for European cars sold in the United States, so you can use those. Okay, so you got that? Everybody, are we together now? Is anybody turning into a skeleton or your eyes glazing over? All right. All right.
What's API stand for?
Did you remember that a while ago? Anybody tell him? What's API? American Petroleum Institute? You got that? You weren't listening, were you?
No.
10 points off. Motor oil has become a very sophisticated fluid. It's designed by committee. So the committee members come from 4 different groups: automakers, oil marketers, chemical companies, and automotive engineers. Got that? Society of Automotive Engineers is an international group of engineers working in different companies in all areas of transportation, not just automotive. They don't just work in automotive, they work in all areas. And what they're trying to do is create a standard language and definition to ensure a given thread pitch, oil viscosity, or diagnostic trouble code will be the same in Detroit, Stuttgart, or Tokyo. And this is Society of American Engineers. That's who that people are, SAE. The viscosity numbers on a bottle of oil that you look at, a lot of people don't know what they mean. We've talked about this before. Everybody remembers what the W means in 5W20 or whatever. You remember what that means?
Wait.
Winter. It does not mean wait. It means winter. Okay? People will argue with you about that and be wrong. It means winter. It does not mean wait. Okay? All right. Working closely with other groups, the chemical companies make the oil additives also participate in service category development. So, okay, as you note earlier, we talked earlier about this, automakers are represented by ILSAC, which were created in '92. The issues surrounding temperature, forced induction versus natural aspiration, extended oil change intervals, that kind of thing, and the need to prove emissions and fuel economy are taking on more and more importance. You know, API standards have always been applied to multi-grade and single-grade lubricating oils used in all the applications, but the automaker needed a greater focus on developing oil and additives for automotive grades. All right. So whether you buy a motor oil by the quart, gallon, drum, or somewhere on the label, there's going to be the word API Services followed by 1 or 2 pairs of letters. It's going to appear somewhere on the label as text. Got it? But it all has to appear. Also, it's got to appear on what's called the donut symbol. You seen the donut? The little donut symbol on the oil. It'll actually have a little symbol that goes. It's got a symbol here like that, and then it's basically. I'm just going to make sure I'm drawing it right. Then it'll have some letters up here, F, you know, blah blah blah, and then down here, you know, it's going to say energy conserving or something like that. And you'll be looking at that little donut to see what it is you got. And so let me see here. Let me get on here. So. Like so many other automotive technologies, though, motor oil has been redesigned several times to help vehicles meet tightening emissions and fuel economy requirements, and the chemists have been able to create oil for new engines that also satisfies all the needs of earlier engines so that you can actually go backwards. meaning you can use oil with the latest service category rating in an automobile engine. Now, how many of you guys have ever driven anything old enough that used non-detergent oil? You ever do anything like that? Non-detergent oil.
Packer once.
Yeah. Well, what happens if you put high detergent oil where non-detergent oil used to be? It washes everything out of there, and you wind up with a bunch of daggum oil leaks. That's a bad scene, man. But, you know, basically, that's something you need to be thinking about. Okay, so oil with earlier service category specifications is available, though, so you need to check the specs and don't just pour it in there. You know, start with in about the mid-2000s, the federal government was requiring auto manufacturers to cover the catalytic converter warranty for 120,000 miles, and there's active ingredients in there that, you know, expensive metals in the converter like, you know, palladium, rhodium, you know, platinum, and all that kind of stuff. And engineers have been successful at reducing the amount of platinum group metal needed to make a catalytic converter, but they fail due to poisons in the engine out exhaust gas, and part of that, you know, comes from the oil, sulfur and stuff like that. So new engines consume some oil through the crankcase ventilation system. So how is it that the crankcase ventilation system gets oil in it? What is it that's supposed to keep an engine from burning oil? The rings on the piston, on the cylinder walls, will have some blow-by. Some of that blow-by is going to get back down to the crankcase as a steam, a gas, got all in it. The PCV system is going to pick it up. It's going to run it through the mix, and that's going to eventually make it out of the catalytic converter. So they got to make the oil so that they're not going to mess up that precious metal in those catalytic converters. You know, because obviously, if the manufacturer's got to cover it for 120,000 and the oil's messing them up, they're having to replace them early because the check engine light popped on because you got a PO420 code or something like that, and they're going to make sure that the oil doesn't ruin the catalytic converters. You got low phosphorus motor oils, and some zinc phosphorus compounds have been used successfully as an anti-wear agent, but as a substitute, chemists developed enhanced friction modifiers for an additive package, basically. You know, the synthetic oil is actually engineered from the ground up instead of, you know, having petroleum and stuff added to it. Producing low sulfur motor oil requires a different base stock, which is the oil from the refinery that makes up more than 80% of a quarter motor oil, but it's still made from organic crude but with a different refining process. Okay, so that's caused some temporary cost and availability problems, or it did, you know, a few years back, but they pretty well whipped it now. The new base stock oil improves the finished product's cold start performance. Now, what's oil got to do with my cold start? With my cold start performance? Think about it. Why would an oil have anything to do with the way my car starts?
Because if it's cold, was it sink to the bottom and not lubricate?
It's thick. And you're having to, you ever try to stir something real heavy? You know what I mean? That's like that. So you're basically wanting oil that doesn't interfere with the cranking of the car, but still stays in place and lubricates and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so a healthy engine is going to breathe less oil vapor too if the oil's not formulated right. Viscosity is a measure of the oil's ability to flow at a given temperature, which indicates how thick the oil film will be on metal parts. That's an important factor. Obviously, it flows more slowly and forms a thicker film when it's cold.
Okay,
Repeat that.
Viscosity is a measure of the oil's ability to flow at a given temperature, which indicates how thick the oil film will be on metal parts. And obviously it flows more slowly and forms a thicker film when it's cold, and a thinner film formed when it's hot. Got it? Because automotive engineers operate over a wide temperature range, they use multi-viscosity oil that doesn't quite get as thin when hot or quite as thick when it's cold. And the keeper, the SAE is the keeper of those viscosity specifications. And when SAE 10W30 oil is cold, it's going to flow like a 10-weight oil does in winter temperatures. That's the W, which is winter, and like a 30-weight oil when it's hot. All right, you got that? Now that doesn't mean multi-grade oil gets thicker as it gets hotter. It means the oil flows the same as straight 30-weight oil does when it gets hot. Multi-viscosity oil is created by adding polymers to narrow the change in flow rate over wide temperature ranges. Okay, so they're always trying to improve fuel economy. So they're designing their engines to use lighter oil, 5W20, 5W30. Some hybrid engines are using 0W20 oil, but 0W oil is actually thicker than 5W oil. And I learned that from oil. I went there to teach in El Paso, Texas, a few years back to teach electronic diesel classes to the Border Patrol mechanics out there a long time ago. Well, it's probably 2006 or whatever it was I went out there. Anyway, he was teaching a class on oil and antifreeze, and he was the one that had studied all that. He says 0W oil is actually thicker than 5W oil, which they kind of screwed the numbers up on that. But it just kind of boggled the minds of the people that were in the class. But he studied that. He was teaching the thing, and so I believe what he said, and I've read it other places too. All right, so what is oil supposed to do? A, It's supposed to lubricate moving parts. B is supposed to carry heat away from engine parts. That would be convection, wouldn't it? Right? C is supposed to act as hydraulic fluid for lifters, tensioners, and actuators. And finally, it's supposed to seal the rings to the pistons and cylinder walls. That all is going to help, right? And we do a wet test when you do a compression. You squirt some oil in there, it seals it better, and pressure comes up if you got ring problems.
What's that third thing you said?
The third thing, was I going too fast?
Yes.
It's supposed to act as a hydraulic fluid for lifters, tensioners, and actuators. Today's engines are tighter and built with greater precision. Tell you something else they've done. They put these little skinny low-tension piston rings in there. How many of you guys have ever seen a car or a truck or something that's been sitting up a long time, and they've been trying to start it a long time, and whenever you spin the motor over, it sounds like it's spinning over real slow, like that. And then when you finally fool around with it and get it started, it spins over normally and it fires up. Now, why is it spinning so slow when it's been sitting in the barn and you've been trying to start it and it won't start? You have any issues like that on that Chevrolet you're working on? Yeah.
That's what's happening in my truck right now.
Yeah. Well,
It just keeps saying battery dead, battery.
well, you got issues with some kind of voltage drop things or a weak start or something like that. But the long and short of it is, if you got one that's been setting up, the oil gets washed off the piston rings, and the piston rings are dragging on those cylinder walls, and it's making it hard to turn it over. These newer ones, when the oil gets washed off of those, like these newer ones with little low tension, thin, skinny piston rings, they sound like they ain't got no compression at all. They just like a timing belt's jumped on them. They go, eh. And if somebody's cranked it up and moved it around a lot to the point where it's got the plugs fouled, it won't start, and the cylinder walls are washed down with gas because they've been trying to start it, it ain't firing, it's squirting gas in there, it's washing them down. I've gone out there to the service lot. Car comes in on the hook from a used car lot. You spin it over, it's got no compression at all. You'd swear it was a timing belt. Well, don't go there yet. If it's one of them that's been started and shut off a lot of the times, it came from a used car lot where they move it around the yard and shut it off a lot. You take the spark plugs out, shoot a little bit of oil in each cylinder with a oil can, put it back on. Let's start getting compression. Fire up. And you just knew it needed a timing belt. You know, because it'll sound like it. You know, you hear what it sound like when a timing belt jump. You know, if it's squeezing air on all of the cylinders evenly, we go whoa, 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 whoa. If it's got a jump timing belt, it go whoa, 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 whoa. You know, it sound like it's squeezing on a couple of cylinders maybe, but not the other. Sometimes it will. It depends. If it's firing on an open intake valve, it will. All right, so now then, so what's the right oil? There's two different kinds of service categories, one for gasoline engines, one for diesel engines. Gasoline oils are in the S category, and diesel oils are in the C category. So if you see one that says starts with S, if you're getting ready to put oil in a diesel, you better make sure it's a compressor and fired oil. It's best to have the right kind. Most of these diesels, like these Power Strokes and all, they use this Shell Rotella oil in them and stuff like that. But you better make sure it's got the exact classification that diesel calls for, because a lot of the times, like some of them Power Strokes, you know, starting in not 73, but 94, they started having these hydraulically actuated injectors with friction modifiers, and they had to have CF4 oil. Compression fired is what C stands for. S stands for spark fired. Can you remember that? Remember that. There's been 5 new categories. Let's see, they were updated, you know, and each update, the second letter is actually more than 5 now, because this is a handout, not that new. With each update, the second letter in the service category advances in the alphabet, so SF oil is newer than SE oil. So the farther you go, like if you got an SA oil, it's not going to be as new or as better than the lower the letter on the alphabet after the S, the cheaper the oil. You got me? So you'll see SF, FC, FB, FD, the second letter is important. So keep that in mind. And make sure you're putting like the newer the vehicle, especially if you got variable valve timing and you got this other little hooey going on, then oil viscosity is extremely important. Put the wrong stuff in there, you're going to be, having issues. All right, we're almost done here with, whipping through this. Some marketers have been making the earlier SL category with new low sulfur, low phosphorus base stock, but only the SM rating has both base stock additives that conform to the latest ILSAC GF4 specifications, although the extended catalyst warranty was required for 04 model, GF4 specs weren't finalized and released till January of that particular 2004 model year. There's production of ILSAC, which was SL is ILSAC GF3 oil, and they pretty well, I think, quit making that eventually, and it got superseded by that later oil. Okay, let's see if we can whip through these the questions that you didn't get answers from. Okay, everybody got viscosity, right? Number one, viscosity is what?
The ability for oil to flow at a given temperature.
Yeah, given temperature. That's really good. Based on the handout, which of the two oils you see on this particular question here is suitable for use in a diesel engine?
First one?
Why so?
I don't know.
Neither one of them is, because neither one of them is a compression-fired oil. It ain't got no C on it. It's not a C-grade oil. They're both S oils. Those are spark-fired. S stands for spark-fired. C stands for compression-fired. You got me?
Which one of these two are suitable?
All right.
for use in diesel?
ILSAC is an acronym. It stands for what? Tell me what ILSAC stands for. Anybody remember? Huh? Get your pen and write it down.
Label Standard Sun.
International Lubricant Standardization and Approval Committee.
President, I got a question for number 2 again. You said diesel starts, it's going to start with an S, right?
No, diesel's going to start with C. Think of compression fired. A diesel's fired by compression. So it's going to be a C oil. It's got to start with a C, not an S. You can't put spark fired oil in a diesel. Now, what you can do in a lot of cases, you can take a diesel fired oil and put it in an older spark fired engine.
Okay.
But a compression, you got a lot of blow by on them diesels and all that, and it's different. You ever know that diesel oil gets so black?
I'm thinking of glow plugs.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the glow plugs are only there whenever the engine's first starting up. They don't typically burn, but very little after the engine starts when it's really cold. ILSAC is the acronym we just talked about. What is a service category? That certifies the oil's ability to pass specific lab tests that measure the oil's ability to perform in an engine. In other words, the service category is the certification that's created when they run it through these lab tests. They run it in an engine, they look at it again, they see how it broke down and whether or not it did and how it held up, see. And so it's just, you can just put a service category certifies the oil's ability to pass specific lab tests. You know. Okay, then number 5, API stands for what? Somebody tell me?
American Petroleum Institute.
American Petroleum Institute. And then number 6, what's SAE stand for?
Society of American Engineers.
Society of American Engineers. Number 7, who are the SAE and what's their primary goal? That's a long question, isn't it? Okay, that's an international group of engineers working in different companies in all areas of transportation, and their goal is to create standard language and definitions to ensure a particular thread pitch, oil viscosity, or diagnostic code will be the same all over the world. See, what they don't want is somebody calling something in another country a size that is not being called here and all that kind of stuff. Matter of fact, your SAE, the J1930 regulation on your emission standards makes them call the sensors and everything all the same. Because we're trying to, it's a global thing. All right, number 8. What group does the API represent? What do? That API creates industry standards. They represent the oil marketers. API, American Petroleum Institute, represents the oil marketers. Yeah, and then finally number 9, that's basically the API. Number 9, engine oil's got to do 4 things. Somebody tell me what one of them is.
Lubricant.
What else?
Acts as hydraulic fluid.
That's a good one. What else?
Displace heat.
Carries heat. What else?
Seals rings.
Seals the rings. Really good. When SAE 10W30 oil is cold, it'll flow like 10-weight oil does in winter temperatures. That's the W, stands for winter. And like 30-weight oil when it's hot. Does that mean it gets thicker as it gets hotter? Yes or no?
No.
Does not get thicker when it gets hotter. Okay. All right. Now let's see how we can put through this next little thing here. Now this one right here is it's an article that I wrote for Motor Age. This particular one about the black gold article. All right. Huh? All right. So I'm going to talk in just a minute about this. I got to whip through all this. And a vehicle's health is dependent on motor oil for more than just lubrication, which we talked about that. Frequent oil changes alone are no guarantee an engine will last, although they do help. I like to tell that story about that guy named Edmund Harrison. He was a guy that I knew that had worked in Los Angeles down there, and he lost that job down there and moved back to Port Arthur. And he had this GMC pickup. It was a 74 model. This was back in the late 70s. And he told me one day at work, he said, my timing chain broke on my truck, and it cost me $400 to get it fixed. And I said, your timing chain broke on your truck? He said, yeah, it broke, and it bent all the valves, and I had to pull the heads off. It cost me $400. And I said, so I started asking questions. I said, how many miles did that truck have on it? Because, timing chains don't break. I mean, not on a V8 like a 350. He said, well, I don't know because the speedometer quit working at 385,000 miles. Okay, so question number 1, to recap, the only component on an engine that receives unfiltered oil is the oil pump. Number 2, plastic gauge is the best way. I'll show you guys how to do that. I would usually do that in engine repair too. Why do engines with overheated camshafts have pressurized, overhead camshafts have pressurized oil leak points that cam and block engines don't have? See what I mean? The reason I'm asking about that. You got your, let's say, let's go draw a 4-cylinder here. Alright. You got an overhead camshaft here, camshaft's down here, timing chain is going around the tensioner going up there like that. That's just real simple. And so I got S-cord out there. Okay, this is going to have a pressurized oil leak point that, let's draw another one right next to it. We got a head, we got camshaft. Of course, this camshaft's driving these rocker arms, opening the valves, and all that kind of thing. This one here doesn't have, there's a leak point on this one don't have, because this oil pump is going to push oil through a little O-ring in that head gasket up there to oil this camshaft where it's spinning in that head. You got me? So you're going to see, if you got what looks like a pressurized oil leak somewhere, you're going to be looking at that, find out by looking at your shop manual where that oil goes through the head. It may be in the center, maybe at the corner. It goes through an O-ring place in there, and if you got a bad oil leak there, you may have to have a head gasket put on there. There was a car that came in here one time, it was a Dodge Stratus, had a 4-cylinder in it, and they had taken it to a shop in Tallahassee, and the shop in Tallahassee said it needs rear main seal. It was a pretty bad oil leak. We cleaned everything up, put dye in it, and it was coming out from under the cylinder head. So we put a head gasket on it to stop the oil leak. We'll see what they were probably going to do, because it was dripping off the bell housing. Somebody said, rear main seal. Remember how me and you and Daniel were working so hard to make sure we knew where that thing was leaking the other day before y'all started doing all the improvements? You better find that leak before you start digging. A lot of times the shop, and I don't know who that shop was in Tallahassee, but a lot of times what they'll do is they wanted $1,000 to put a rear main seal in it. What they do is they put the rear main seal in it, and it's still leaking just like it was, and they say, well, we got some of it, but we didn't get it all, so now you need to pay us another $800 to put a head gasket in. You know what I'm saying? Because then they find the problem. So find the problem before you do the work, and that way you don't have egg on your face, and everybody's not all upset with you, right? All right, now let's go to the next one.
Well, so the answer to that is?
If they've got a pressurized oil feed that through the cylinder head gasket to the overhead camshaft, what prevents damage from occurring if the oil filter becomes completely clogged? Anybody know? There's a spring-loaded, and it looks, well, you can look over there. Look over there on that. See that little bunch of oil filters that I've got off the internet for that guy had cut apart? There is actually a little spring, and so when that oil filter stops up, it actually pushes that little valve out of the way so that the oil can still go through the filter. It ain't being filtered, but unfiltered oil is better than no oil. So if it stops all the way up, there's a little spring that's actually, when the oil, this will be the filter here, it'll push that, it'll squeeze that little spring, and the oil can go by the filter so that it can go ahead and lubricate the engine. Now, there was a little time, there was a mess that happened, there was 1 year model of Jeep Cherokee 4-liter where they moved the oil pressure relief valve into the engine oil filter, and from 1 year to the next, and that oil change place down there put the wrong year model oil filter on one of them Jeeps, on a couple of Jeeps, and burned the engines up because they wound up with no relief valve. You see, it was a peculiar thing. But the long and short of it is, just because the filter screws on there doesn't mean that it's the one that you need to use on that engine. That is an important distinction that everybody needs to recognize. Crankshaft bearings should not have more than how much clearance? Oh, incidentally, the answer to number 4 is a bypass valve and engine oil filter. Crankshaft bearings shouldn't have more than, what is this? Somebody, I say that. I actually read that wrong. Tell me what this is. What's that measurement, guys?
1.5
Yeah, it's like 15 10,000ths is what it is. Is the way you'd say that. So it's over there. 15 10,000ths is 4 over. So that's like a half a thousandths over 1,000th, right? Shouldn't have more than that. Yeah, that's the right answer. The oil pump's always driven by the camshaft. True or false? What drives Garrett? What drives the oil pump on the 350? Well, the crankshaft drives the distributor. The distributor drives the camshaft drives the distributor. Excuse me. And well, the crank drives the cam drives the distributor, and the distributor drives the oil pump. So basically, it's indirectly driven by the crankshaft, but the camshaft drives it. Okay, what about on the engines that have you guys torn one apart and you've seen the engine with the little do flats on the front of the crankshaft? It's got a little gerotor pump on the front of the crankshaft. Some Cadillacs are like that, and I think an Escort's like that out there. That Toyota, 98 Toyota Camry out there, the doggone oil pump driven by the timing belt. So anything that can spin that. Now see, think about this. That sounds scary, don't it? What if something happens and the oil pump quits turning, or if the timing belt quits turning, is the engine going to keep running? No. I mean, so what I'm saying is you don't have to worry about, let's say the engine is not going to keep running if the timing belt jumps in there. You say, what if my engine keeps running because the timing belt jump and the oil pump ain't spinning? It's going to burn something up. Well, that ain't so. It's going to quit anyway if the timing belt's broke. So.
The distributor on my truck just has a straight rod going through it straight to the oil pump.
There you go. That's right.
So
So
the answer is distributor?
it's actually, no, actually that's false. The oil pump is, anytime you see always on a question, that's a buzzword. Always, never, this kind of thing. What happens if the oil pressure relief valve sticks open? The oil pressure relief valve is how it makes pressure. It pushes, remember I've done this before, but basically the oil pressure relief valve, sometimes built in a pump and sometimes built in a cover. It's going to be in the oil circuit somewhere. And it's basically got a spring, and it's set up so that whenever there's a hole right here, a bleed off hole, it's covered up by that, right? So as that oil pressure comes up through this passage and it pushes that up, it's going to bleed the pressure off. But that spring is calibrated so that it has to it takes like 50 pounds of pressure or whatever to move that plunger and open up that hole. If this sticks open where that hole's always open, you got no oil pressure and you burn that sucker up. So if you got one that's starved for oil and you're trying to fix it, you need to make sure you check the oil pressure relief valve wherever it's at, or you're going to have one that's going to burn up again. Got it?
It will burn it up, stick open.
If it sticks open, it'll burn it up. If it sticks closed, it can blow the oil filter slam off the car. If you ever see an oil filter blow off the car, the oil pressure relief valve is stuck closed. I mean, stuck and won't relieve oil pressure. Because that is a positive displacement pump. And that motor is going to turn that pump. Either the pump's going to explode or be destroyed, or it's going to put up enough pressure to where it's going to blow the oil filter slam off the car. Poof. And all that. So, how many of you guys have ever worked on an engine, we're almost done here, that has some of them old Chevrolets, and they have a real heavy cord of a can, and it comes down here and it's made like this, and it's got a bolt that goes through it all the way up here, and it's got a cartridge type oil filter in it, and that can is real thick. All right, what happens with those is it won't blow that off of there, but it'll actually choke the engine down. It'll either destroy the oil pump, or you'll find the engine losing power because of a stuck relief valve in the oil pump. That used to happen sometimes, but that's old school stuff though. Okay, so what's one thing it can cause just about any engine to develop oil sludge?
Contamination.
Short drives without letting the engine warm up, or an inoperative PCV system. I mean, if you got a brand new vehicle, if you don't let it warm up, you're not doing it any favors. I've got my wife programmed to that obsession. She's not going to crank her Explorer unless she lets it warm up. You know, because of the sludge factor. She's worried about sludge. And finally, frequent oil changes will guarantee that the engine will last. You can have problems no matter what, but if from my money is on keeping the oil clean and keeping it changed regularly. That's what I like to do. Okay, personally.
Miss 9.
Number 9, in addition to lubricating the engine, what other functions does the oil perform? Basically,
like the 4 answer you got, lubricate?
nah, well, there's a couple of them here. The only two I was looking for on this particular handout was it cools engine parts and suspends contaminants. That's something else that the other handout didn't have in it. It also suspends contaminants. When you're getting ready to change oil, and when it's a good idea to crank it up and make sure the engine, when you change the engine oil, the car needs to be nice and warm, so that a lot of the stuff that would ordinarily have settled to the bottom will actually be up in the oil, and you'll be draining the contaminants out with it instead of have them settle, you know. So if you change the engine oil when the engine is cold, you're not doing as good of a job as you go ahead and let the engine get good and hot.
Can you at number 3?
Number 3 is why do engines with overhead camshafts have pressurized oil leak points that cam in block engines don't have. The ones with overhead cam got a pressurized oil feed to the cylinder head through the head gasket, and they can leak, and they do leak a lot of times. I mean, you'll see them leaking there. All right, is everybody happy?
Yep.
See it. All right, go to